Hey guys, it's Ken on the Morfydd guys. This is reviewing. This is a movie that I was kind of looking forward to. I thought the concept was actually really interesting, and it just seemed like a film that I thought could be really well done. And that is none other than The Man Who Invented Christmas. And what The Man Who Invented Christmas is essentially about is we center on Charles Dickens, and we're at a point in his life where he is a very esteemed writer, but he's actually had three flops. And basically this illustrator comes along and he's counting on Dickens to deliver him a classic, deliver him something really great. Unfortunately, Dickens is at a time in his life where he's got really severe writer's block and he can't really come up with much of anything, but eventually he does come up with what ends up being his most famous novel, that being A Christmas Carol, and we basically kind of go through the making of how that novel came to be. So The Man Who Invented Christmas in general, like I said, I was definitely very interested in this movie, solely because of a couple of reasons. One, because Charles Dickens, I've always really enjoyed his stories. A Christmas Carol, obviously, one of the greatest Christmas stories ever made. Everyone knows it. Everyone's pretty much heard of it. So that in general got me interested. But I always love the stories of, like, how did this get made? Or how did someone come up with this concept? That stuff just really interests me. Like Saving Mr. Banks, for example. That movie, I think, does it perfectly, where it shows this is how P.L. Travers got the idea for Mary Poppins, but also this is how she felt with it being turned into a movie. That they achieved it perfectly in that film, and I was really hoping Man of Invented Christmas could be something like that. And while this film does a relatively good job of covering, what Dickens really went through, unfortunately, it's just not that memorable or interesting of a film to really say anything about. I really was not the biggest fan of Man Who Invented Christmas. It's not a terrible film by any means. There definitely are things I really do enjoy, but in general, I just didn't really find this all that interesting. But we are going to get into starting off with the cast. And I'll just say this, there are definitely some problems with this movie, but the cast is not one of them. Dan Stevens especially is fantastic here as Charles Dickens. I thought he was honestly really well casted, because you really do see Charles Dickens here. And Dan Stevens been having a hell of a year for sure between Legion and Beauty and the Beast. This is another great turn for him. I thought he did a really great job here. He's very animated. He's someone who, he's so focused on his work, and, he's just so laser focused on it that the characters are like real people to him. And the way that he gets into his stories and the way that kind of is his make it or break it. Like, if he's not writing a good novel, if he's got writer's block, he goes crazy. He's just not stable. And you see how this really does affect his personal life. And Stevens did a really great job here. He's very likable. You can see why Dickens is so beloved by everyone, and he really does a great job here. I thought he definitely was very well casted here, and he's definitely one of the things that kept me pretty much in the film throughout. Everyone else here, there really isn't too much to say. Christopher Plummer, I guess, does a good job as Scrooge. There isn't really much for him to do. Jonathan Pryce is good as Dickens' father. I actually really liked the woman that played Tara. Tara is one of the maids that's working for, is working for Dickens, and their bond that they had throughout the film, I actually really did enjoy. It's some of my, probably one of the film's higher points. I definitely did enjoy the bond that they eventually did have. I thought the cast overall, they all did a suitable job. There wasn't really a bad performance in there, and that's definitely something I will give this film. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, because that is really, for me, where this film does falter. Now, I will say, the tone to this film is fine. I thought Bharat, Nalluri, he did an interesting job with, the way this film is directed. You think it'd be like a really dark and serious story, but for the most part, this is just a little bit silly, and they're not taking it as seriously as you think they would, but it's also not a comedy. The trailers made it seem like this was going to be like a wacky sort of film, and that's really not what it is. To me, the tone, honestly, is kind of jumbled. The film, at points, doesn't really seem like it knows what it wants to be. Is it trying to be this sort of, like, Hitchcock-type film? What I mean by that is, if you've seen Hitchcock, that's a film that it involves serious material, but it doesn't take itself too seriously. So is it trying to do that? Is it trying to be a more grounded biopic on Dickens' life? I mean, it doesn't really know what it wants to be in terms of the tone, and there are parts that definitely did work, but there were definitely some parts that felt very corny, and the laughs especially fall very flat here. I saw this with a few people in my theater. Not a single person laughed. There wasn't really a single laugh amongst anyone in the theater, and the jokes really do fall flat here. But that really is nothing compared to the story, because I'll say right now, the story's not bad. It's just really lacking, and, here's how I'll put the story. When you read something in a history book and you find out how someone created a story, or you find out who that person was, and then you pretty much feel like you've got all the information. That's Man Who Invented Christmas. This is a story that, sure, does sound interesting on paper, but that's the thing, it's on paper. If I were to look up the story of Charles Dickens, I'd probably be a lot more satisfied than having to sit through an hour and 48-minute movie of him having severe writer's block, him envisioning all of these characters, him kind of losing it, all this various stuff, money problems he has throughout the film. Just stuff that I honestly did not care about. This story in general, it sounds interesting. It does, but the way they portray it, it's just not really all that interesting. It takes, I'd say, an hour for anything that interesting to happen. Eventually, once he comes up with the title of Scrooge, that stuff is interesting to see. The way that he did put together A Christmas Carol, I thought was fine, but it's just not really that interesting of a story, and it's not really something that I personally feel needed a feature film. The only reason I think they made this into a feature film is, I don't know, Dan Stevens, they want to give him another great film, but also because I guess they just want to pay homage to A Christmas Carol, because in general, this feels less like a film and more like just a tribute to how great A Christmas Carol really is, and how, it's such an amazing story. There are sections of this film that are kind of reenactments of A Christmas Carol, and it's very strange because half of this movie is a biopic of Dickens' life, but then the other half is trying to be this, like I said, reenactment of sorts, and it didn't really work for me. And what also really didn't work is Plummer's role in the film. It's not that he's bad. Like I said, he's not the problem here, but I don't know what his character is, because at one point it seems like it's just the character that Dickens envisioned, but at the end of the film, even Dickens says, "Who are you? Why are you still here? Why am I seeing you?" Well, I thought that his purpose is that, Dickens sees all of his creations, and, it's such a, it's just such a human experience for him that everyone he sees he views as real people. I thought that's really what it is. But then the film tries to overcomplicate it, and they try to make it more that, he's schizophrenic, and maybe Scrooge represents something else, and it really didn't work for me, I have to say, and it really didn't make a ton of sense, especially towards the end of this film. I really could not tell what they were trying to do with this character, and it just didn't really work out. And I'm sorry to say, but Jonathan Pryce, as good as he is, he's kind of wasted in this film. He doesn't really have anything of merit to do. They keep flashing back to Dickens' childhood, which is really not as interesting as the film says. And it's little glimpses here and there. Like, it's one of those films where we'll cut to his childhood and then we just, cut to something else back to the present. And I didn't see the point of it. I really did not get why we kept getting all these flashbacks. It felt so out of place. It felt so arbitrary, and I did not know what they were really trying to do there. But like I said, there are some things I really did enjoy. I thought the scenes between him and Tara, this girl, when he's telling her about the story and she kind of gets wrapped in, I thought that stuff was pretty strong. I did like the interactions between him and John Forster. I thought their bond was actually really good in the film. I like what they did with that. But like I said, it's just not really that interesting of a story. The cinematography's fine. It definitely looks right. Like, you definitely get the 1800s feel, and I think they portrayed that pretty well. The score's kind of whatever. The editing here, I thought was kind of choppy at points, honestly. I think they really could have spent a lot less time on things than they did. They spend so much time on how he comes up with the name Scrooge and things like that. And again, it sounds interesting, but watching it in a film, it's just not. And halfway through the film, I just kind of said to myself, I should be a lot more interested in this, but I'm just not. And I honestly did find myself quite bored throughout the film. And if it hadn't been for those performances, you know, I probably would not really have liked this movie all that much. I didn't really like this movie that much, but the performances did elevate it for me. Stevens did elevate it. Plummer did a really good job, and their bonding is good throughout the film. It just, I don't really understand why we needed this movie. It felt very unnecessary at points, and it felt like the film was just trying to capitalize on A Christmas Carol's success rather than pay tribute to it, and it just didn't really come together in the end. So like I said, it is kind of a mixed bag for me overall, and I am going to give The Man Who Invented Christmas a C. Really disappointing overall, guys. I thought this could have been a really fun holiday film, but it's honestly nothing all that great. It's not a lot of people are seeing it, and you know, if you aren't interested, then you're probably not going to see it anyway. But that's it for my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys thought of this movie overall. You have seen it. Love to hear your thoughts on it. What is your favorite Charles Dickens novel? Definitely interested in that. If you guys have read Charles Dickens, that's, you know, he's obviously, you know, the main character here. So what is your favorite novel if you have? But that's in my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.